Shadow of the Erdtree doubled down on the problems that Elden Ring had, and I'm gonna explain it in a sec why I don't think it properly fits the game style. But first, this video is meant to highlight issues for me, someone who primarily loves story and world building games with combat, but who also loves a challenge. Games like Hollow Knight, Silksong, and Expedition 33 are ones I'm completely fine with, difficulty wise. Nevertheless, this video is just my opinion on why I could never really get into Elden Ring, no matter how hard I tried. I tried numerous times, solo a couple of times, and with friends using a co-op mod, and in both cases it was disappointing. That said, I understand why people love this game so much. I will say that I am a new player to From Software games, and I've only played 7 hours of Elden Ring. However, I think my short experience with the game perfectly aligns for the first impressions and new player expectations, and why I believe it fails people who are not already From Software fans. So, Elden Ring, a game with 92% positive reviews on Steam and numerous Game of the Year awards, appears nearly perfect at first glance. However, the following is a critique of its systems and genre-specific structure from my personal perspective as a new player to From Software games. This isn't necessarily a critique of how the game was made, but rather a suggestion of potential alternatives that, if explored, I believe would be widely appreciated and potentially implemented in future Souls-like games. While an overwhelming majority loves Elden Ring, for me, it has too many systemic annoyances. The game is riddled with quality of life issues and complexities that don't add to the actual difficulty, but detract from its core essence. The more I tried to enjoy it, the less it offered in terms of engaging systems and pure fun. Before anyone assumes these systems are inherent to Souls-like games, I encourage a broader outlook. I approach the game with ideas of innovation rather than immediately dismissing suggestions for change, advocating for what works rather than change for its own sake. While this introduction might seem somewhat disorganized, my goal is to highlight the negative aspects I've encountered in a highly praised game. What follows is my alternative perspective on Elden Ring. My experience went like this. Oh, a cool looking boss, great. Let me try the parry mechanic, just like in Expedition 33. I'm in the 15th attempt. I still didn't parry anything. Maybe you can't. Well, whatever, let's just try dodging. It went better, but still far from a potential kill after 30 minutes of attempts. At this point, combined with the tutorial in the cave, I've been playing for about an hour, and nothing to show for. So I googled how to beat the first boss, since I was already tilted. People talked about getting the mount, which would make things way easier with the tree sentinel. And so I did. What followed was me running around, doing at most 1 or 2 hits, and then running back. Felt very slow and tedious, waiting for an opening. My efforts seemed futile with the little damage I've done. I grew impatient and made mistakes overcoupled with the fact that the boss attacks are sometimes a bit buggy or glitchy. And in particular, in all the time, I could not understand when the sentinel would do its super fast shield slam as opposed to the normal attacks. And I thought maybe I'm just terrible at the game. But at the same time, I figured out the parry mechanic pretty quickly in other games, like Expedition 33. It was very frustrating not understanding what I did wrong to get hit. After giving up and going to the werewolf cave nearby, I had a significantly better experience, managed to counter some of his attacks and beat the mini-boss, and was somewhat satisfied. But when going back and trying the tree sentinel again, nothing seemed to work. It felt like I was thrown at the deep end, and there was nothing to do to get better. I did go and try to beat Margit, the Fellowman, but at this point I spent 5 to 6 hours in the game, only defeating the werewolf mini-boss, and I dreaded what was to come. If I can't beat any other bigger bosses at the start of the game, having significant experience in Souls-like games, I knew I would have killed the Sentinel or the Margit the Fell Omen if I just committed enough time, but it felt way too hard for what was the first boss in the game, especially when it felt there was no reward of lore or progression. Contrasting other Souls-like games that I played and enjoyed like Hollow Knight or Expedition 33, the difficulty curve of my experience was much better, even though I was also stuck on some bosses for around an hour. But it felt beatable. It was easy to understand my mistakes and what to improve on. Furthermore, usually in those games you get a progression lore dump or some interactions between characters when you beat a boss. All of that Elden Ring lacked in my short experience with the game. The problem for me with the Tree Sentinel that this is the first encounter after the tutorial zone. I just can't accept that it's the best way to introduce new players. The first battle should not be harder than the immediate subsequent fight. That is just plain and simple common sense. You want the player to improve bit by bit as he progresses the game and encounters foes with increasing difficulty. However, upon further research, I realized that a lot of people accidentally skip bosses and come back way later, and realize it's way too easy now and they don't get that proper difficulty curve. People online are talking about missing entire zones like Weeping Peninsula and realizing only later that they should have went there. And I believe I also missed it, since I only followed the little gold dust trail to the next thing, and people will say that is how the game is supposed to be, it's an open world. And what I say to that is to look at its pairs. In Expedition 33, you would get indications that the zone is too hard for you, or in other games the zones would be set up in a way to guide you to the next appropriate encounter. Because of this, design encounters in Elden Ring look like a sine wave, where it starts immediately at the top and descends upon the next encounter. Again, this might be a Dark Souls formula, but in my opinion it is wrong to do that. At least make it clear that you don't need to defeat him straight away. You are a new player to Dark Souls, or even gaming. It is very reasonable to think that you need to beat the opponent you are facing. When I talked to my friend about other bosses in the game, I understood that the game is meant to be very open and explorable. Some bosses will be more easy, and others harder. If you can't beat a boss, go level up. But that's a weird premise when you can't defeat the first boss the game throws at you. Especially if you don't have a friend telling you where to go to level up, instead of fighting bosses immediately. Nonetheless, I'm not making a case that you can't play Elden Ring if you don't have a buddy to guide you. All I'm saying is that it makes a difficult game like Elden Ring more distasteful to more casual players. And before you come in and say, well, this is not meant for casual players. I'm not a casual player myself, and many of the DLC players and streamers do not want to finish the DLC because it was too hard, even though they have completed the main game. If you want to get a bigger audience, you attract it and convert it. The current type of design is repulsive, even for people who completed the main game, for several reasons. As a new player, you are not familiar with the mechanics of the game, and you're just trying to set your keybinds or just get used to the movement. But the game immediately throws one of the harder bosses at you, which I believe would make many players question whether the game is not for them simply because of the first encounter. You can still absolutely make the boss fight difficult, but maybe make it obvious that you should not fight it right now unless you want a challenge. The common practice in most games goes as follows. The first encounter of the game is easier than the subsequent, and it's made for a very good reason. The logic of just accepting it for what it is because it's a Souls-like game is flawed if you haven't played other From Software games. The boss doesn't have to be weak, just weaker or on par with the Wolverine in the cave. You can just swap around the fights and make the one in the cave harder and the one at the start easier, and I genuinely don't believe the die-hard community of Souls-like games care much about the first encounter being really difficult. But nonetheless, if you don't want to do it, just make it clear that you can easily skip this boss and not lose anything, and come back at any point later. I'm not going to go to any depths with builds, since the devs themselves stated they don't really care how the encounters are approached, but nonetheless, on the internet you can find various strategies deemed to be too good for the intended gameplay loop, of having to figure out the complete moveset of a boss before beating him, or just strategies that trivialize the encounter. There is a negative sentiment on Ashes of War that I tend to agree with, since Ashes of War can be used to change the skills and affinities of armaments. Its usability seems limited due to the fact that you can't simply put them on whatever equipment you want. They are restricted to a type of weapon or flask. The alternative choice of making these Ashes of War found on weapons to make them unique for that specific item seems better than to homogenize what each weapon class can do. If you can put them available on most things, this reduces repetition in a repetitive game. Elden Ring is more fun with variants, especially when the game is based on fighting, dying, and repeating the same boss with the same moveset forever, and hoping you can understand a little bit of whatever the lore is about. This makes being a mage in Elden Ring a great change of pace from the ordinary melee combat. However, the way the spells work seem to trivialize encounters, due to there being no aiming for mage spells. Seems like an odd oversight, given the size and complexity of the game and of other builds. While build variants should affect difficulty, this playstyle difference is too extreme, and yet I don't really care, since the game is supposed to be this super try-hard elitist game that gives you a lot of social credit amongst friends if you beat it. The game's difficulty is highly dependent on the playstyle. The leveling system highly emphasizes damage, and sustain is left as an afterthought. In fact, I believe, as many other, that bosses are way harder with heavier armor, since the light roll travels farther and has less recovery frames when backstepping. Game's combat is heavily knowledge based, lacking the ability to cancel moves mid-swing. This makes precise timing crucial, but oddly, cheese tactics like jump attacks often prove effective against bosses. During my research, I found that the game supports OP builds, certain mechanics that are borderline overpowered, like some Ash of War combinations that deal excessive damage, and making use of the Mimic Tear Ashes with certain equipment seems to be too good, using Rotten Breath to inflict Scalded Rot on bosses with high health pools, applying Poison Mist to enemies from a safe distance. Not to say that somehow allowing such things in the game or patching others is better or worse, but rather this approach shows that From Software designs games with a wide array of tools and mechanics. They often encourage players to experiment and find creative solutions. Therefore, my suggestions to make the combat less clunky would be an improvement on combat many should appreciate, if done properly and not just made easier. Consequence of combat being more responsive, as in the player has the ability to cancel basic attacks, leads to inherently lesser difficulty. However, it's not a problem if you adjust and balance for it. And anyway, when OP builds and strategies exist, the game was clearly made having in mind that a certain level of difficulty can be surpassed using strategies and systems in the game, like summons. One can always artificially increase the difficulty if he decides to do the combat encounter a specific way, like parrying. It might not be intuitive, but the same can be said about all the various ways you can make the battles way easier. Information overload, or rather lack of information. Paradoxically, both statements are true. Elden Ring's crafting is not intuitive enough. When upgrading your weapons, you will need to defeat bosses and explore various secret locations, but given that it is impossible to know where every smithing stone or other materials for upgrades are, you might end up a little paranoid, checking every possible crevice or dark spot, just in case something will be hidden, which leads to annoyance. Constant clutter of random materials, such as flowers, thrown across the map creates a sense of unease, without knowing their true value or importance. Players may feel compelled to collect everything, leading to unnecessary time waste and frustration. You might be having a way harder time if they have a significant impact on boss fights. Items like Blood Ball or Aromatic are some of the best. In example, it gives 30% increased physical damage, 20% increased max stamina, and as a negative, you get minus 25 all damage negation for 60 seconds. You can hold up to 10 of them and store up to 600, meaning for 10 minutes you can have this buff during a fight. But you can only find this cookbook if you find a corpse sitting in a chair on one of the rooftops at the Shaded Castle in Atlas Plateau. Items like this should encourage exploration. However, I find it more annoying knowing I have to either check every spot possible in case I find these types of items, or follow a guide on Reddit. This also leads to a huge waste of time, and then you spend a significant amount of time out of game in Discords and Google searching for answers on where to find all these things, rather than playing the actual game. Did I miss anything? Is a phrase that perfectly describes my short experience with the game, since it doesn't tell me anything I need to know. Obviously, the game is not designed for you to collect everything and use all the possible items and combinations. I'm just saying they could make it a little bit more clear on what is good and niche. Elden Ring shouldn't make me easily miss one of the best consumable items in the game, unless the game is supposed to be played without it. These craftable buffs reduce the difficulty significantly, leading to high variance in power levels for everyone, therefore cheapening the experience of it all. I end up searching for optimal builds if I don't want to break my character, or at least not be in a huge disadvantage, or needing to grind levels, or just be weaker than my friends playing the game. You can increase your stats when you level up, and apparently you only get a respec opportunity when you are above level 50, making your early build choices very impactful until then. If you break it somehow by getting useless stats, good luck trying to reach that respec as fast as possible, or better yet, restart the game if you don't want to be miserable. Why would the game not include a respec option that is always available or easy to get? What's the point of not letting a player do it? If he is a new player, and everyone is when they play for the first time, a From Software game, you can easily make mistakes and you can't even experiment various builds early on in fear of breaking it. If you don't do your research prior to playing the game, you don't even know that you won't get the respec until after level 50, or if you will ever get a respec. Baffling choice. I'm searching for locations of smithing stones. I'm searching for crafting recipes or guides on what is good to craft and where to search for these materials. The game's failure to provide in-game explanations for builds, crafting recipes, and boss tactics leaves me feeling lost and overwhelmed. While doing research for this video, I found a very useful infographic of all the weaknesses certain bosses have. Having that accessible in-game would be so much better if you choose so, or maybe if you did some optional quest or puzzle. And if you don't care, that's okay, it just gives more variance to gameplay and choices. If these things exist, why not make it accessible if you so desire? Remember that the game is not meant to be super sweaty, and the developers themselves said that you can approach the game in many different ways. That's why there is a lot of possible strategies and builds in place, so let them. Through gameplay, players are forced to consult external guides and wikis, disrupting the flow of the game and diminishing the sense of discovery. Now obviously, you can discover these things in-game through trial and error, but that is just way too convoluted. If Elden Ring wants me to use a specific thing for a boss, it has to show me how I can recognize it instead of looking up Wikipedia. And I'm definitely not changing weapons or potions mid-combat, trying to see if the health bar of the enemy changed based on my attacks when all my focus is on the boss movement anyway. I don't think the game wants you to quit it before you beat it, and anyway you can't upgrade every weapon you have. On a quick note, the PC version with mouse and keyboard is just really bad. It's perplexing why From Software decided to make fast switching with arrow keys, since during combat I also need to use my mouse and move with WASD, we don't have free arms. The mount not having a summon keybind leads to me using arrow keys to find it between the flasks. This lack of quality of life sometimes annoys me more than the fights themselves, or rather acts as an amplification of the negative emotions that I'm overwhelmed with during the fights. And I know the game is supposed to be played with a controller, but it doesn't excuse the fact of poor keyboard and mouse optimization. Sorry, or lack thereof. Apparently everyone is preaching how great it is. With the little time that I played, all I heard from NPCs were riddle-like sentences and something about being maidenless. I asked my friend whether he knows the story or what happened during the game since he praised it so much. Obviously, he couldn't explain pretty much anything in more depth than you are maidenless and tarnished, whom is seeking to be the Elden Lord. Later on, my friend acknowledged that no, he did not get it immediately and needed to watch YouTube story explanations, which again takes the player away from the game and therefore makes the story less than what it could have been. If you can't make the story understandable within the game and you have to read every little thing on the ground for more lore and decipher riddles and magically know what everyone's talking about, the story is just not it. Most stories aren't complicated. Most good stories are simple. Like in Lord of the Rings, where the main character just needs to throw the ring down Mount Doom. The problem arises when you want to create something unorthodox, something that will immediately catch your attention and make you want to find out more. Elden Ring to me seemed like a story not designed for its characters to progress in a linear fashion. Unlike Lord of the Rings, instead the entire mystery is the story, and that's what you should want to uncover. Granted, the art style alone makes me want to search for more lore, but it seems to me the devs went a bit D&D-like with the story. What I mean is that when I play D&D with friends, they or I in the past have created this immaculate story that will unveil episode by episode, but it always crumbles along the way. Usually the story is not strong enough for the players to get attached to and seek answers. For the DM, the story is clear and concise. He made it after all. But from the other side, it can seem like white noise. It's usually because the DM sees the whole story while the players see only tidbits here and there, not even knowing if there will be some big revelation to be hyped about. The delivery in which the information is presented is also very important. Everyone knows there is a huge difference when someone speaks with specific tone for a public speaking or audiobook compared to melancholic delivery of the same work. The notes in Elden Ring are the melancholic speech, as in D&D and in Elden Ring, the plot lines were made in a way to encourage players' agency to find out what's happening in the world. But players don't really care and are apathetic to the whole ordeal. They just go with emotions. rather than be excited to find out more. Do I want to find out what is happening in the world? Yes. Do I care enough to read scattered notes? I'll pass. Especially knowing, at least from other games, the notes themselves will give very little detail. I would rather read up some guide on how to get better at the game than waste time piecing everything together like it's some puzzle I need to piece together. I'm not saying to change the formula to make the game easier and remove the essence of what Souls games are known for. What I'm asking is to reconsider systems in the game that support the gameplay. There is no need for all these superfluous systems to confuse everyone and draw the player away from the best thing the game has. Don't make it so convoluted. In my point of view, Elden Ring would in fact benefit massively in some changes and not lose the core audience, in fact increase it. Ask yourself, did you enjoy searching online for all the viable builds when you were stuck? Did you enjoy watching story explanations from YouTube videos? Did you enjoy encountering a boss that's meant to be defeated later on, but had no idea, and spent extra hours on him before you realized it was doable way easier with different items, or meant to be taken care of later? Did you enjoy the crafting, and searching all the dark spots for the little things? Did you enjoy missing out on zones you should have completed earlier on and now they're trivial to you? You may have, but having a choice of more accurately interpreting and interacting with these systems and storylines in game would surely be more beneficial. Maybe my changes would make the game not Souls-like anymore, or Dark Souls-y enough, but at least some of the ideas should be explored. Ultimately, it's a great game, but a flawed one for me that I could never get into.